Welcome to special district elections, the elections you don't know about. My name is Christina Manthe. I am with the Jefferson County League of Women Voters, and I've been asked to facilitate tonight's meeting. What is May 2nd? May 2nd is election day for special districts. There are 2,843 active Title 32 local governments in Colorado, and on May 2nd, we go to the polls to vote for directors for these entities. The questions you should be asking yourself, and that should be going through your mind right now, are: what is a special district? What special district am I in? How do I find out? How do I vote? This is Colorado. This is an automatic mail-in ballot, right? How do I get prepared to vote? How do I find out who my candidates are? How involved should League be in special districts? Special districts affect every aspect of Coloradoans' lives, and yet we know very little about them. Special districts provide ambulance service, fire department service, cemetery, water and sanitation, health services, park and recreation, conservation, and metropolitan districts throughout Colorado. Metropolitan districts are the largest segment of this group at 2,223 districts. We have had to make a slight adjustment to tonight's schedule. Ann Terry, who is the executive director of the Colorado Special Districts Association, was expected to speak on behalf of the special districts, but she had to withdraw this afternoon. So we will be making some adjustments as we go along. Brian Matisse and John Henderson from Coloradans for Metro District Reform are with us to discuss the intricacies of special districts. We will open with Brian discussing the history of special districts. In addition to being a lawyer, Brian serves on a special district board and hopefully we'll be able to discuss some of the functionality of special districts. John is also a lawyer and was instrumental in disclosing the special district abuses that occurred at the Solterra Metro District. Brian and John will also discuss the abuses that can occur within special districts. John will be discussing the types of reform that is necessary, and will be including any bills that have been drafted in his discussion. We will close with questions and a discussion on what League's role can be in the area of special districts. Brian?
Thank you, Christina, and thank you, members of the League. I appreciate the opportunity to address you and your interest in this important area of democracy. I want to begin a little bit by telling you that although I'm an attorney, so don't hold that against me. I'm also been a representative of my special district. I got elected to my special district, Tollgate Crossing in Aurora, in 2006. I was the first homeowner. The Tollgate Crossing Metro District was a new subdivision. And the first thing that happened when I moved in is I heard about this thing called the Metro District. And I said, well, what is this thing called the Metro District? And I learned it's a government entity. And so, being curious, I went to one of the board meetings, and it was a board meeting all the way across the metro area because that's how they did it. They didn't want to have the board meeting in the district boundary because, heaven forbid, homeowners might show up. So they had it all the way across town. And so, but I appeared anyway, and I learned that there was this thing called the special district elections that happened every 2 years in May, and that I could run by submitting my self-nomination petition. So I did that. And I did that in 2006. There was an election in May. I defeated one of the developer candidates. They were sort of shocked. They didn't expect there were going to be any homeowners running. And I wound up winning the election. At that point in time, we wound up turning Tollgate Crossing Tollgate Crossing Metro District over to the homeowners by basically, I convinced the board members that they should allow the homeowners to be elected at the 2008 elections. And it's actually been wonderful because with the homeowners in this, it's about a 3,000 resident community, with the homeowners in control, we've done some pretty amazing things. The elections that Christina referred to in May, this is the first year that special district elections are being held in odd numbered years. They used to be held in even numbered years in May, and that was a problem because it conflicted with the June primaries. So the legislature changed the dates of the election to odd numbered years for the purpose of allowing the county clerks and recorders that run elections to actually run the elections. Otherwise, in the past, special district elections were almost exclusively run as private elections by designated election officials, which were usually the attorneys or paralegals that were hired by the district and the developers to sort of run these elections. It's our hope that county clerks and recorders will take advantage of moving these to odd numbered years, that they will now hold these elections as coordinated mail ballot elections, just like we elect all of our other state and municipal candidates and federal candidates in other years. I'm going to put up a few slides here if I can do this. Let me just see if. 1 second here. I'm going to share my screen, and I hope that I'll put up the right thing this time. There we go. You should see a slide that says metro districts by the numbers. And as Christina noted, the proliferation of special districts in Colorado over the last 50 years has been quite dramatic. In the 1960s, there were very few, if any, metropolitan districts, and there were some other special districts like fire and sanitation districts. But since 2000, there's been an explosion in metropolitan districts, and now there's over 2,200 metropolitan districts in Colorado. That's quite an amazing number. There's more debt that has been issued by metropolitan districts in Colorado right now than the entire state of Colorado debt. State debt right now is around $22 to $23 billion. Metro district debt is about $25 to $50 billion, depending on how you define it. Christina had some up-to-date numbers. This is a presentation I gave actually last year. As of last year, there were 2,132 metropolitan districts. Now, as Christina noted, there's over 2,200 metropolitan districts, and they're creating hundreds of districts each year. About 1/2 of all local governments in Colorado, including counties, towns, cities, home rule municipalities, and school districts, there's more special districts and metro districts than all of those. Total voter authorized debt. This is important. The Tabor authorized debt for metro districts right now is over $2 trillion. That's trillion with a T. And if all these metro districts issued all of this debt, it would amount to literally hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars of debt per resident of those districts. And right now there are 2 metro districts in Colorado that have over $100 billion each of authorized debt. And 4 metro districts, you should have received your tax bills within the last week. And you notice there's a mill levy on those tax bills. Most people that are outside metro districts, the mill levies maybe 70 to 80 mills, and that's usually mostly 50 mills for the school district, maybe about 10 mills for the county, and maybe another 10 for the city and various other districts, maybe library districts, for example. But there's 4 metro districts that have over 100 mills of levy by themselves. That's an incredible amount of property taxes that are being imposed by them. I want to give you a little history of the special districts in Colorado. Special districts have been around a long time, about 100 years. In the early 1900s, the purpose of special districts was to perform services in unincorporated areas of counties that municipalities, meaning cities and towns, normally perform, I should say. For example, fire protection. Counties don't provide fire protection, so if there was a danger that if you have an area in the county where there was a substantial number of people living, the only fire protection services would be maybe volunteer fire protection services. So the thinking was, we need to have special districts for unincorporated areas to provide fire protection. Water, you want to make sure you've got good water quality in those unincorporated areas. So special districts were created to provide water service. Sewer, you want to make sure that there's adequate sanitation so that you don't have a lot of people living together with perhaps septic systems that are not very safe. So in the early 1900s, these special districts were created to perform these services that cities and towns would normally perform. In the 1950s, the idea was, well, why don't we create what are called metropolitan districts, which are districts that perform 2 or more of these services. For example, if they provided fire protection, water, and sewer, they might be a special district, a metropolitan district, and you'd have one governing body instead of 3 separate ones. The sort of the watershed events that happened were in the late 1900s. In 1980s, the Mission Viejo Company, they organized Highlands Ranch. And I'm sure some of you, maybe one or maybe a few of you live in Highlands Ranch. Highlands Ranch is not a city. It is not a town. It is not an incorporated municipality. Highlands Ranch is one of the largest unincorporated census designated places in the United States. It has about 100,000 residents now, and it's completely outside the boundaries of any city or town. It is a metro district, Highlands Ranch Metro District, that provides the services in Douglas County to the Highlands Ranch residents. Well, the thinking was that was so successful that in the 1990s, developers began coming up with the idea, and primarily this was because of Tabor. As you know, Tabor makes it difficult to raise funds through taxes or bonds because it has to go to a vote of the people. So the idea was, why don't we use multiple metro districts basically to impose the bonds and the taxes before there are any residents? And so developers started creating a structure where every neighborhood essentially within a particular area would have its own metro district. And then they decided that they wanted to have what is called a master servant metro district structure in the 2000s. And that the concern was that metro districts, like all other special districts, are government entities. And unlike homeowner associations, which are private and which developers can control until there are more than 50% residents in the built out homeowner association. In the case of a metro district, as soon as one eligible elector moves in to the neighborhood, they can run for the board, just like I did. I ran for the board in my district in 2006 when there were only maybe 5% developed. And so the developers said, let's create what are called the master servant structure, where you have a single district that will have no residents in it, and only the developer will own property in it. And then we'll have a servant district, which is the taxing district. That's the district the homeowners will reside in. And what will happen is the homeowners will be taxed, and they will pay their taxes to the developer district, the master district, and the master district then will put in the infrastructure, the streets, the water, the sewers, et cetera. And of course, the bonds then from the taxing district will be used to pay that. In 2004, Aurora, Colorado came up with another variation on that. They created what was called the Aurora Regional Improvement Tax and Aurora Regional Improvement Districts. And what those were, actually they're authorities, Aurora Regional Improvement Authorities. What they were is residents in the metro districts would pay for improvements outside their boundaries. So instead of just paying for the water and sewer and roads within your neighborhood, you were going to be taxed, and that tax was going to be forwarded to the city of Aurora or this authority, and this authority then would put in the major arterials. Maybe they would put in something completely unrelated to your neighborhood, maybe 30, 40 miles away from your neighborhood. But the idea was the city wouldn't have to pay for that. Instead, only the residents of these new metro districts that were created would pay for those new improvements. And more recently, in the 2020s, we've seen the creation of different kinds of metro districts, which are authorities and inclusion area districts, so that the homeowners on the metro districts can't do very much except tax themselves. Now, I want to talk a little bit about how metro districts are organized. This was something that Ann Terry was going to present, but I'll go over some of that. The way in which metro districts are organized is a proponent, which is typically a developer or a property owner, presents a service plan to the county, or if the property is located in a city or town, a municipality, they present that to the city or town for approval. Now, the metro districts are supposed to, when they submit this plan, it's supposed to satisfy certain statutory criteria. It is supposed to include a defined geographic area. It's supposed to include a need for service. Basically, we need to have water, sewers, roads in this area. It needs to show that the service is unavailable from another source. Like, for example, there's no city water lines in this area. There's no city sewers in this area. It's supposed to show there's an ability to finance the debt and an ability to provide economical service. And if approved, the petition is then filed in the district court to hold an election. Now, of course, the initial election, there's no one in the district except the developer's own property. And under the Special District Act, owning property is sufficient to qualify you to vote in a special district election. Unlike municipal and state elections where you actually have to reside in that area. At the initial election, they typically also approve election questions, which includes things like debrucing to eliminate debt term limits, to authorize large amounts of debt, and mill levies. Special districts provide benefits. They provide the potential for economical development of infrastructure, such as roads, water, sewers, parks, pools, and public landscaping. But it's important to know it depends on whether or not metro districts are going to provide that service. If the interest rate on the government bonds is lower than what the homeowners are paying on their mortgage, then yeah, it makes sense. The problem is that some special district debt is junk bond debt, and sometimes you see 8, 9, 10% compound interest on that debt, which actually is less affordable because your mortgage would actually be cheaper, typically if it's a 5 or 6%, mortgage, for example. Districts can also foreclose on property. So, for example, if a development fails, like many districts did in 2008 and 2009, the district can take over and can get another developer in there to basically clean up the mess and put in the infrastructure and finish the development. Districts can also pay for services like landscaping and pools through very efficient property tax collection, as opposed to, for example, homeowner associations that have to charge residents monthly fees, and sometimes those monthly fees aren't collectible. They also provide the ability of low-cost insurance through the Colorado Special District Property and Liability Pool. Unfortunately, metro district debt can also be very expensive. I live in Southeast Aurora, and so as a resident and a director of Togay Crossing Metro District, I try to keep in mind the cost of the metro district taxes compared to my other neighborhoods. And for example, you'll see in this area, depending on the district, you can have mill levies as high as, in this case, there's one district that has a 79 mill levy, and they pay one district pays $3,603 a year for a typical home in property taxes and fees, which is pretty high. So that adds another $300 and some to your mortgage, if that's property taxes. You have some other districts, of course, that are more reasonable, and like Conservatory and district I'm in, Togay Crossing, which the property taxes are much lower, about $1,600 to $1,800. And once again, these are districts that the homeowners took control of some time ago. So that's all I'm going to present right now. Once again, metro districts have the ability to provide very efficient services. They have the ability to finance that infrastructure. The problem is you need to get homeowners on the boards. It's very easy to get homeowners on the boards. You basically self-nominate yourself. All you have to do is submit a self-nomination petition. There's a window of time from now, January 31st, until February 24th. It's a short window. It's only 24 days. You have 24 days, if you live in a metro district, to submit a self-nomination petition to the manager of your special district, and you can run for the board and be on the board. The problem is that a lot of homeowners don't know about this yet. And in addition, we have seen many districts where the manager, when they get a self-nomination petition, say, you know, you don't really want to be on this board. We want to discourage you because all the only thing the special district does is it taxes people and it really doesn't do very much. Well, actually, that's not the case. And special districts can do remarkable things. Our metro district, for example, besides being able to refinance and pay off our debt much sooner, you know, we're doing things like with a completely homeowner controlled board, we're putting in safety systems like security cameras. We've reduced crime because we've got a neighborhood security patrol and neighborhood watch. We've got clubhouse renovations and pool improvements that can be financed through tax dollars if the tax dollars don't have to go to pay off outrageous developer debt. So at this point, Christina, I'll turn it back over to you, and I think, or John.
Thank you, Brian. That was very informative. John, would you like to start?
Yes, thank you. It's wonderful to be here, and ditto to all of the comments that Brian made. You know, this organization is so important to the integrity of local government in Colorado, and it's just a joy to finally be able to meet you all and talk a little bit about metro districts. Just a little bit of quick background. I moved to Colorado and had some time on my hands while I was waiting for the bar motion to be approved, and got involved with a group that was concerned about the development at Dinosaur Ridge. Many of you may recall that there was a proposal to build 4 car lots and basically totally engulf the program that there at Dinosaur Ridge. In the course of working on that with some of my neighbors, we had literally reams of paper on digitalized as well as paper. And as I was going through all this stuff, these things called metro districts kept coming up. Now I've been involved, and I know Brian has too, I've been involved in representing developers in different parts of the country, representing citizens and developers, and I developed my own property. And I had never heard of these things called metro districts. But long story short, we found that our developer was using income from our fees and taxes to subsidize another developer over Dinosaur Ridge. That created problems of its own, but that started my journey about 6 years ago in learning everything I could about metro districts. And as I kept turning the pages, becoming more and more alarmed at what was going on. And I just decided I needed to share this, identify issues, and help other residents address the issues and opportunity for change. Otherwise, I couldn't sleep at night. It did no good rattling around in my head. I needed to get the word out and share. So that's what we're about, and that's what we've been doing, Brian and our organization, for the last 2.5 years or so. Just a couple quick notes. There's so much to be said about metro districts, but in terms of setting the stage and concepts, as Brian indicated, these things have been around for a long time, and the premise is a sound one. That is, a group of people who want to do something and tax themselves in order to accomplish that, form an organization, tax themselves, and direct how the money is being spent. There are many special districts that are really providing wonderful services. The metro districts that we're talking about are not those kinds of animals. And what we're talking about is districts created solely for the purpose of developing land, of building a new neighborhood, a new residential neighborhood. And the reason I say it's a different animal is because when you talk to attorneys about these things, and the first time I did at the annual meetings for the SDA Association, They say, well, special district, this special district. I said, no, 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 no. I'm talking about the metro districts that are created to build neighborhoods. And they get the sly smile on their face and they say, oh, you mean dirt districts. There's nobody there. There's nobody there that's organizing themselves to tax themselves to pay for some special project, transit, water, recreation, entertainment. There's nobody there. And I think it really comes to a critical point when you're talking about what you and we are most focused on, and that is the voter and elections and self-government, because metro districts are everything but that. Let me what I'd like to do is go through a series of documents that tell the story. These are the same documents it took me 3 months to find, and no new homeowner will ever find before they sign on the dotted line. So examples of metro district voter abuse. It's just the name of the game. Literally a quote that was delivered to me by the developer attorney when I started to complain to him about what I was finding. As Brian said, you start with a service plan. I'm not going to talk about that. That has issues all of its own. But for the purposes of this discussion, let's begin there. A service plan is an application by the developer to the city or county to approve a metro district. And typically in Lakewood, for example, up until recently, the city councilors had a deer in the headlights response to it, didn't really quite know what to do with it. The only source of information they had about what it was and what they were supposed to do came from the developers, and they would routinely rubber stamp these. Not much attention was paid to the financial plan or really what this was about. But that's where we start, a service plan. And for the purposes of this discussion, one of the key elements of the service plan is a limit, an authorized limit for debt, how much debt the developer is going to be allowed to issue and have the residents pay in order to build this development. Now let's step back a minute. Developers make their money traditionally by buying raw land, putting pipes in the ground, the infrastructure, adding profit, and then selling that now developed lot to a home builder. The home builder builds a house and sells it to you and I. When we pay for that house, we assume we're buying the house, the land, and the pipes in the ground. And traditionally, in most other parts of the country, and certainly been my experience, that's paid for, your infrastructure is paid for through the cost of the lot. The cost is $30,000 to $40,000 per lot. I'm not making that up. That comes from the Special District Association. Ann Terry's an executive director. I have a PowerPoint screenshot of that number that she delivered in a presentation. The Colorado Home Builders Association also uses that number. $30,000 to $40,000 per lot is the cost of the infrastructure. And they say, if they can't do metro districts, your home is going to cost $30,000 to $40,000 more, because they would have to include that in the price of the land. So metro districts, as it turns out, are there initially to simply finance that $30,000 to $40,000. Now, a home buyer could pay that in cash. They could incorporate it into their mortgage, or they could get another loan to do it. Metro district financing is the most expensive way to finance it, because it involves a loan from the developer with interest, and then another loan through bonds to pay off that principal and interest, and adds more interest. So you end up paying interest on interest. And oh, by the way, we found in Solterra, we're still paying in the cost of the lot the amount it would cost to put the pipes in the ground. We did the analysis in Solterra, did research, published a paper on it. We found that after you subtract out the cost of the land, the cost of the infrastructure per lot, and subtract those numbers from the amount of money we paid for the developed lot, there was $75 million profit left over on $41 million cost. So, and that's before Metro District financing. So there's a lot of, there's still a lot of significant questions, unanswered questions by the industry as to why we even need this, because it really begins to look like Metro District financing is simply a way to finance exponentially large profits with zero accountability to the homeowners. And let's get into that. The second document, and I think the most important document after the service plan, is what I'm showing you here. And that is an excerpt from the ballot issue. We're all familiar in Colorado with ballots, long, sometimes convolutedly worded issues that we vote on. And here is the ballot issue in the initial election, usually within days, if not weeks, of the time that the service plan is approved. There's an election. And you would think, well, okay, they have to elect the board for the district. Well, they do a lot more than that. Brian referenced it, and they call it, even call it their table election. Well, the first thing they do is they increase the amount of debt authority. That $1 trillion, here's how it adds up. In the service plan for this particular district, the authorized debt granted by the city to the developer was $60 million. Here, within literally days after that service plan limit is adopted by the city, the developer turns around and has their own election, and they increase that limit tenfold. The debt here is 60 million, and there are 10 of these ballot issues. 10 times 60, $600 million is now the new debt authority, with a repayment cost of 492 million times 10. The repayment cost is the principal, the 60 million, plus interest for as long as 30 or 40 years. The second thing they do, which is the most egregious abuse, is that they eliminate the right of the residents to ever vote on increased taxes or bond debt. Through this document, through this ballot issue, through this election, the developer imposes increased debt authority on the residents, and at the same time eliminates the residents' opportunity to ever vote on the issuance of debt up to that amount. They've given themselves a blank check up to, in this case, $4.9 billion. And you see the language there toward the end. This revenue will be collected, retained, and spent by the district as a voter-approved revenue change. And it's the district board of directors who make the decision as if the voters had approved it. And this is the election that created that situation. Now, it took me a while to figure this out, piecing it together. I must have read those ballot issues at least a dozen times. And then I came to a bond prospectus. That is to say, the disclosure made to people, institutions, the Teachers Association, pension plan, buying the bonds. And they had to make disclosures. And I thought, well, this should be interesting because the level of required integrity, if you will, in presenting facts and information is heightened when you're dealing with in the bond market and finances. And sure enough, they explained it. In this same district, at the 2006 election, the voters voted to impose 60 million times 10 for a total of 600 million in total debt authorization. Footnote, this is never disclosed to any homeowner buying a house in a metro district, but it is disclosed to the bond purchasers. The repayment, the total repayment cost is, yes, count the numbers, the zeros, $4.9 billion. So the residents moving into this district have hanging over their heads pursuant to a vote that was taken in 2006 of debt authorization, a blank check that the board can issue at any time up to 600 million with a total repayment cost of 4.9 billion. The good news is, once those residents pay $4.9 billion, they don't have to pay any more. That's the good news. Again, you see the reference to voter authorization. The voters voted for this. What they never said, and they don't say in any prospectus I've ever read, is that the voters who voted to authorize this debt authority and put residents into potentially significant debt, the voters that did this were 8 people. And there they are. This is the district. These 8 people, I say sitting around in their office eating pizza, but in any event, who are these 8 people? The developer, family members, employees. Not one of them will ever be a resident, and not one of them will ever pay these taxes. 8 people voted to impose $4.9 billion in potential repayment debt on me and my neighbors. Here's another district, 5 voters. You'll see the names, Smith Hills, husband and wife, the developers, and as I recall, the other 2 were partners or employees. They had an election, they voted to impose this debt. That was in Sterling Ranch, Colorado. The debt there, 1.8 billion, with a repayment cost of 14.7 billion. How do these individuals who will never live there and never pay taxes make these decisions and continue to serve on these boards? The statute says, well, let me step back a minute. Ms. McGeady, one of the leading Special District Association attorneys, testifying last year during a committee hearing on a bill, went back and forth with one of the representatives explaining that the folks who are making these decisions are, yes, employees or agents, folks hired by the developer to do nothing but sit on boards. In our case, many of our board members sat on at least a dozen other district boards in other communities. She said, we enter into contracts with them for the option to purchase property, and that qualifies them to vote and serve on that board and issue bonds and set taxes, something that the residents never get to vote on. So she said, we get to do that under the statutes, and the statute she's referring to is 32-1808. And you read the first paragraph, and there it says, no, you can't do that. No person shall knowingly take or place taxable property in the name of another, enter into a contract for the purpose of attempting to qualify as an eligible elector, except paragraph 2. And the one section there that's most applicable in communities where residents are in fact living and have moved in is that they can continue to qualify as electors and either be appointed or elected if no one else wants to run. If no resident self-nominates and elects to run. In our community, fairly affluent, sophisticated community, for 11 years, residents never ran. And for 11 years, the developer and his attorney canceled the elections for 11 years. When we went knocking on doors to recall the developers off the board, I can't tell you the number of times that my neighbor said to me, you can't do that. You can't do that. The developer told us that we can't serve on the board until it's all built out. I showed them the statute, I showed them the number of times it canceled the elections, and they signed my petition. Developers, unfortunately, continue to do things to discourage folks from participating, from self-nominating, and even when they do, as Brian said, they often gather everybody together and say, you know, these elections are so expensive. It's going to cost $15,000 to $30,000 to have an election, and you don't want to spend that money. So let's just agree to not have an election and work through it. And unfortunately, that still happens. I'm working with half a dozen districts right now that are in transition, and several of them are still fighting the developer in order to get those seats. Here's an example of the cancellation of the election. One of the 11. Let me talk about finances and just follow the money here for a moment as to why this is critically important. This is the bond prospectus. I had an excerpt of that earlier for $12.4 million. When you follow the money through the budgets, this bond was issued by, as Brian said, one of the resident taxpayer districts. It was sold $12.4 million. The money came into the budget as revenue to District 3. District 3 paid it to District 1, the developer district. Go to District 1's budget. District 1 receives the $12.5 million from District 3, and they pay it to the developer. The developer sits on the board. The developer votes to issue bonds. The residents never get an opportunity to participate in that. The developer decides how much the bond will be. The developer issues the bonds. The developer takes the money as the district. The developer pays himself the money as the district to the developer. And the end result here in the last slide is, here's the impact on the residents, the people actually paying the taxes who never get a vote. They pay property taxes, in this case, close to $2 million. And that is quickly divided among the bond interest and the bond principal for 2 sets of bonds, and then additional income transferred to District 1 to pay individual debt, almost $2 million. We have been working on various reforms in order to try to address many of the abuses, some of which, and just a few of which, I've shared with you in those documents. There are 2 bills currently in play that directly address some of the potential abuses. One is applying the ethics rules, the Ethics Commission, to metro districts. You have a significant public decision-making body here that in many cases is dominated by the developers, and there's no oversight. There's no check and balance. The cities aren't doing it, the counties aren't doing it, the state isn't doing it. It's left to the residents, and if the residents don't have a majority of the board, and even if they do, the influence of the developer is so strong that you have to try to apply or enforce some ethical rules. I've had a couple of examples of that just recently, where the developers basically, there's no conflict, I'm not doing anything wrong. And the resident directors who are in a minority say, well, we don't know what to do about this. There's no enforcement mechanism.
But John, that's for all special districts, right? Not just metro districts, this ethics, right?
I think that's correct.
Actually, if I can jump in, it's actually includes school districts. One of the proposal would actually expand the jurisdiction of the Independence Ethics Commission to all local governments, including special districts as well as school districts.
The second bill, and that one's was introduced by Tammy Story, who has really been a champion for reform so far. She really carried a lot of water last year, and unfortunately was not supported. This year looks like it will be different. The second bill is one presented by Representative Weissman. It's a holdover from last year. It's something that's important to a lot of us, and that is to essentially eliminate the developer's opportunity to hold the debt themselves. In other words, when those bonds are issued, typically you would think that they're sold on the open market to the institutional investors to hold, and they're third-party arm's length transactions. Unfortunately, a lot of the bond debt is actually held by the developer themselves. And as Brian has noted on other occasions, if the developer has the resources and is basically using the residents as a bank, then they don't need the metro district to begin with. This legislation would eliminate that from happening. Other bills that we would like to see, we've talked about in the past, and Tammy Story introduced last year. One is citizen initiative. The citizen initiative we are all familiar with. It's available at city and most county governments, certainly at the state level, not so in metro districts. If we had citizen initiative in metro districts, even though we have a developer-run board or a dominated board, the residents could initiate a ballot issue of their own to repeal the offensive ballot issues that were passed 10 years before by the 5 people sitting around the table eating pizza. We can't do that now. We have to go through the board. We only get legislation on the ballot if the board approves it. And if we don't have the votes on the board, it won't happen. Another is the voter, the vote, getting getting the residents on the board, as Brian said. I'm working with another district right now where they can't get a majority on the board for 2 years because the developer's term of office isn't up for 2 more years. There are an abundance of residents who will self-nominate, who want to serve on the board. They desperately, they get it. Everybody woke up, they want to take control of their own purse strings and how that money is spent. But they can't do it for 2 years unless they try to recall the folks off the board, which is a cumbersome process. So one reform that we have proposed is creating a process where the developers who are only sitting in those seats because no one wanted to run have to resign as soon as someone presents a self-nominating form for that particular position. As soon as a resident's available to sit in that seat, there is, in principle, no longer any authority for that developer to sit in the seat that rightfully belongs to the residents. At any rate, those bills are not in print. They're not being proposed this year, but things that we would like to see happen nonetheless. There's one other bill that recently became aware of that is proposing a task force. It's an HOA task force and a Metro District task force. We are told that the proponents are very focused on reform, and the idea is to get sitting around the table as many of the folks who are interested in this issue, including residents, citizens for the first time, to talk about the issues and come up with some proposals. Our group is looking at it. We haven't made any final decisions. There are a lot of concerns about it, but nonetheless, if nothing else, it finally demonstrates that the state legislature is paying attention and see an issue and want to address it. One of my concerns personally is the timeline. Under the way it's currently structured, there would be no reform bills coming out of that task force for this year and then another year. That's 2 years of legislation opportunity that would be missed. And in my opinion, we can't afford to do that. We have to keep beating the drum. And even if it's 1 or 2 bills a year, begin to get reform that's going to make a difference.
I am aware of one other bill that it deals with the contracts that a special district can have. And right now, a special district can have is not required to disclose contracts under $60,000. And the proposal is to raise that limit to $120,000. Well, if you think about the numbers John has just given us, they could install every 3 properties, $40,000, have an undisclosed contract and be going along that way. And who knows what the real costs are on a property. So, and I'm sorry, Ahmad, I don't remember the number on that one. So if you could put that on the screen, that'd be great. One of the things we did not talk about here is John and Brian have done a wonderful job talking about special districts, what they are. How do you find out what your special district is? Go to your property tax bill. They just came out. They will tell you exactly what your special districts are. We've talked a lot about metro districts, but we also have fire districts, water and sanitation districts. The next question is, if we said the elections are May 2nd, maybe. First of all, you have to have candidates. If you don't have candidates, there are no elections. The special districts across the board are required to file notice if they are canceling the election. If they have sufficient number of candidates that will cover the positions on the board or not enough nominees, then they cancel the elections. The Department of Local Affairs maintains a database on the special districts, and part of that database includes information on the elections. It also includes information on who the current directors are and how many slots are vacant on any particular board. How do you vote? Well, this is a little bit of a surprise. We may be a mail-in state, but that doesn't cover special districts. Now, the legislature intended, as Brian was telling me earlier, that when they passed the legislation that changed election dates for special districts to the odd years, that the counties would start managing the elections. That may not be happening. We don't know that for sure because we don't really know if there's going to be elections yet. So we're going to have to research and see who is actually going to handle the elections. If it goes the way it has in the past, these are private entity elections. They're managed by the election official of the designated board, which is probably a law firm appointee. And you are required to get your form for nominating yourself to be a member of the board from that designated election official. And as we know, they are not necessarily required to disclose that there's going to be an election. Metropolitan districts, per legislation, are required to notify their constituents that there's an election. However, the legislators thought that it was too expensive for fire districts, water sanitation districts, cemeteries. Fair? Am I?
That's not quite the way it is. It's the way they're informed. Everybody is supposed to be informed that there's going to be an election, but they decided it was too expensive to inform all special districts via mail or email. So only Metro districts are required to either get an email or a snail mail to tell them that there's going to be an election and they can self-nominate. Otherwise, the manner in which they inform people is so obscure that most people don't know they can do it in the rest of the special districts.
And if you have, it's possible to request a mail-in ballot from some of these districts, but it's up to you to request and know how to request and to know where to vote. Rebecca Winning just told me that Jeffco does not have the resources to take on the special district elections. So these will be handled in Jefferson County privately. Brian has said Arapahoe County has also said they are not handling the elections. So it's up to you to find out if you can get a mail-in ballot or you have to go where you have to physically go vote. How do you get ready, prepared to vote? How do you find out who the candidates are? Maybe on the website for that special district? Maybe. Now then, are there other questions? How do you think Lee should become involved in this area?
Can I make one suggestion,
Sure.
Christina? You know, one of the things that I didn't mention that has been huge for us is disclosures. You know, so much of what I recall you all doing when my mother was on the League of Women Voters and I tagged along was getting information in the hands of people so they could exercise their right to vote. And until recently, it was a piece of paper on a fence post out in the middle of the field. That's how they gave notice. That's changed a little bit, but there's still more that can be done. And getting the word out, getting the information that you've described into the hands of folks. What one thing we proposed was every time an agenda for a Metro District meeting goes out, it should disclose that the majority of the board or all of the board are developers with a conflict of interest. That conflict of interest is expressly stated in the audits. That should be disclosed with every agenda, and with every agenda, send out a self-nominating form and tell the residents they have a right to serve on the board. So anything and everything that folks can do to get the word out that you have a right to sit on your board and counter the misinformation that is still being spread by, folks that they don't have a right or their right is somehow limited. and to emphasize that metro districts aren't about developing a piece of land. That's what the developer does. Metro districts are about repaying the debt, if any, and holding the developer accountable for whatever debt, if any. And all too often, the developers conflate building the development with the metro district, and that's convenient to them, and it's a way for them to pay for their overhead. But they're two very, very different things. The contracts, the obligations, the rights and liabilities that flow between the city and the developer in building that development have nothing ultimately to do with the district. The district is independent of that, and folks need to understand they don't have to wait until the development is built out to take control of their money, of their taxes, and how it's spent.
One of the things we did not cover here, and I don't know how prevalent it is that some of these metro districts are paying interest only. They are not even making a payment on the principal. The Meadows in Castle Rock is one. They started out with $30 million of debt in 1989, and they still have $30 million of debt today, and that principal is due in 2029. Maud?
Oh, not speaking officially for League, but it would be nice if everything that went out to members of special districts also included an application for a mail ballot.
If I may, I
Yeah.
just want, the big problem, especially with the rest of the districts, other than metro districts, is that the requirements for notification. I'll do a quick screen share here to kind of show you the typical ways that people are informed about their elections. Just a minute. Okay. So here you can see a fence post. That's very common. Here is a newspaper in the back, in the small newspapers, the small community newspapers and the classifieds at the back. Or in a place like this, I drove up to Westminster to get this, to figure out where they were giving this information. This is in a huge neighborhood, and this is the notification right there. The next, and then the last one is you can, let me get, right here, it tells you, this is for instance, West Metro Fire, posting place designated for the meeting notice. Listen to where it's supposed to be. The lobby of the West Metro Fire Protection District Administration Building is where you can go to see the posted notice.
Right, right.
So this shows you that really all special districts should have the opportunity to be informed by email or mail. They're claiming it's too expensive, but I think once a database would be created, it wouldn't be such a problem. But now I have to unshare here. How do I do that?
Up at the
Okay. Can you do that? I can't get back to it.
it's
Oh, here it is. Stop share.
up at the
Okay.
top, yeah.
Okay.
John, there's a question in this. I'm sorry, Fair. Are you done? My
No,
apologies.
yeah, I think that is significant. I mean, who's going to see those 4 things I showed, really? And know that they're going to, why can that be their notification that they can run or that there's going to be an election?
And one more other question, John and Brian, if you could stay on afterward, I'd be interested in hearing your more specific comments on the task force bill. Just to pick your brains.
Sure.
Thanks.
There's a question in the chat. Since citizen awareness and board participation is increased in Solterra, what has changed in the Solterra Special District that benefits the residents?
Well, that's a long story, but long story short, we mounted a recall campaign and were successful in getting the board or the developers removed from the board. Residents took over. Disappointing for me that the resident board members essentially were intimidated by the developer and basically decided to continue paying the debt without holding the developer accountable. Interestingly enough, there's now litigation. Apparently, they couldn't pay the developer quite fast enough, and so the developer has now sued the district in order to accelerate those payments, even though they're being paid. The benefit.
Isn't part of the problem there, John, too, is because the council for the district is also the council for the developer? So they were getting advice from the developer's legal counsel?
Well, that was true initially, but after my beating the drum and a few other things that happened, they did get their own counsel. But that the attorneys, Brian can attest to this, the attorneys that are resident oriented, if I can use that phrase, are very thin in their ranks right now. And so most of the attorneys who are representing metro districts are holdovers from the developer. It's not uncommon, as it was in our district, for the attorneys representing the developer to simply continue representing the residents, even though there was a direct conflict of interest. But to answer the question, the benefit is the residents are making decisions. I personally and others may not agree with those decisions, but the bottom line is they're residents. It's not the developer any longer making those decisions. And it is truly, finally, self-government after 11 years.
Yeah,
But the
Smith?
unfortunate thing is all the major decisions have already been made and they're having to live with them. And, you know, for instance, like you said in Castle Rock, those poor residents, I'm guessing that the developers are pretty much gone, but they're going to be faced with this debt that hasn't been, no principal has been paid for 30 years. So what are they going to do? They're stuck with the consequences and the decisions.
Kent Smith, you have your hand raised, and would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Actually, I just wanted to comment that fortunately for us, all of the districts in the Estes Park area are really good about getting the word out. They post in the paper, and if you get a bill from the sanitation district, they let you know that they're looking for people and when the election is. And our fire district and our school district are exceptional, as well as the recreation district, about getting that information out there. So we don't hear the same kinds of things you're hearing down in the metro area, and I think that's good for us.
We have another question in the chat. Mindy's asking, what can LWV do regarding creation of new metro districts? Cities like Arvada seem to love them. Brian?
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in. I think that the service plan needs to be looked at real carefully. And I think there are certain provisions in service plans that can be abusive. And so you sort of need to be able to recognize them. For example, if they have multiple district service plans, you need to make sure that really every district has well-defined boundaries. And I personally think each district should have its own service plan, because if you're approving multiple districts at once, what the developers sometimes do is they start out with tiny postage stamp areas, like this 10-foot by 10-foot parcel will be the initial boundaries of District 1. This next 10-foot by 10-foot parcel will be the boundaries of District 2, et cetera. And then there'll be this wide area of maybe a square mile where they can include property into metro districts as they feel like. That's very undemocratic, because what happens is, what the developers do is when there's a homeowner that wants to run for election in District 1, for example, they'll stop adding property to District 1 and they'll start moving the property into another district they still control. So I think the League of Women Voters should look for abuses like that and should speak out when there's abuses, when there's a situation where basically they're trying to take away the ability of people to run their own government, to vote in their own government. Like I said, I see no problem at all with metro districts if you do it the right way, if it's really citizen controlled, and you've got a well-defined boundary, a well-defined tax base, a well-defined debt limit that is manageable.
Fair.
I was just gonna comment, all the county commissioners and city council members, if you're talking about Arvada, would be city council, they can actually establish some of their own rules that are stricter than the state. And I think in some communities have done that. As a matter of fact, I think one community, Longmont, has even done away, they won't even allow metro districts within the city limits. But they can make some rules that the developers would have to abide by that could prevent some of this abuse.
Yeah, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, John.
I was just gonna say, just amplifying on what Ferris said, that, it's absolutely right. The Metro District statute, in fact, invites the cities to impose more oversight and monitoring controls. But given the dynamic, and there are lots of levels of that, it doesn't happen. And it doesn't appear that the cities are going to do that on their own. So if the cities aren't going to do it, then it's back to the state. We're hoping that the state will impose some restrictions that will eliminate some of these abuses. But at the end of the day, and we keep coming right back to it, the best check and balance and the most effective check and balance are the residents, and getting the residents on the board and getting them educated and confident. For example, and I'll just throw this out, as I say, I've been working with districts the last 6 years in transition phases, and one of the things they can do is terminate these offensive agreements that are essentially requiring that they pay all of their tax revenue to the developer. They, as a legislative body, can do things and take control of the purse strings. So, there are things that they can do, and I think we've been most effective so far at the district level in getting residents on the board and getting them educated to a point where they have confidence to know they have the power, and not only the right, but the power and the ability to run their own government. And just to put a point on it, in a recent debate just a couple weeks ago, I went head to head with one of the developers in a district, and he complained that the residents were trying to get seats on his board that had been in operation for over 10 years, and accused the residents of wanting to play developer. Now just think about that for a minute. They don't want residents on the boards until they've collected every dime they think they are owed without any accountability to the residents. That's the mentality. They own this thing and it's theirs, and they're not going to give it up until they've collected all the money they think they are owed. So there's a total disconnect here. And my comeback to that is very simple. We've got developers who are wonderful at doing development, but they are atrocious at governing. And there are too many developers who want to play elected official and never will be.
It's interesting you should mention that, because one of the requirements for these entities is that they file audited financial statements. with the Department of Local Affairs or State Auditor's Office, and of course, the governing body that formed them in the first place, such as the county or the city. And as you look at the Department of Local Affairs and the State Auditor's website, you will find numerous excuses for not having where they've been excused from filing audited financial statements. And this is across all special districts, not just metro special districts.
Yeah, if I can jump in, there is a loophole in state law that maybe needs to be fixed. And the loophole basically is that under certain circumstances, districts can apply for an exemption from audit. And instead of filing the audited financial statements, they just file it's just a form that they submit instead, and all the developers sign off on that. And that's particularly the case in these districts, like I say, that they'll maybe create 5 or 6 or 10 at once. And they'll just have maybe one district that actually maybe files the audited financials because that's the district that maybe the taxes are being collected from. And the developer districts maybe don't have to file that. And that can be very abusive. That's a very good point. Also, they don't file them anymore, I don't think, with the DOLA. They used to until about 2017. Now they just file them on the OSA, the Office of State Auditor website. So that's where you'll find them.
And is there a limit? Is there also a loophole that they don't have to file if it's under a certain amount? Or
There are some limits, and I don't recall what they are right now. But sometimes they can be fairly high. They can be like hundreds of thousands, like maybe up to perhaps close to $1 million of revenue a year.
yeah, I thought I saw 500,000 is
And
what
they've increased it over time.
yeah.
So it's gotten, so they can sometimes collect a fair amount of taxes and still not have to file.
There's a question in the chat that asks, is it accurate to say that the majority of abuse is from new developers, of which some or most are out of state or even out of the country? Do you know the influence or agreements these developers and our state governor that exist between our governors, reps, and senators?
That's a great point. I haven't seen any data collection or analysis. I can just say anecdotally, a lot of this money is going out of state. Our developer is a billion or multi-billion dollar company out of Canada. I know most of the debt that's being underwritten by the banks is a Kansas City bank. But it's a good point. I don't know that anybody's really collected that data, but it wouldn't surprise me that that's the case, that most of it is going out of state. The amount of money that is being drained from resident pocketbooks, not only to pay this debt, but to support the structure that supports it. You have management companies that are being paid $15,000 to $30,000 to run the election. You have management companies. Ours was paid, I think, it was close to $10,000 a month just to go to the meetings, do the agendas, and tell the directors what was next on the agenda. You have attorneys, you have accountants, you have engineers that all are being paid millions, if not billions of dollars of money that could be spent on roads, education, other public services, or kept in our pockets, all to support, and you get down to the bottom line, how to finance $30,000 to $40,000 per lot.
And I will also comment that I do know of a fair number of out-of-state and out-of-the-country developers. For example, in Aurora, there's this massive Aurora Highlands project that is, like I said, that's the one that has $100 billion of authorized debt, and there's going to be eventually 23,000 homes. I think they've issued close to $1 billion of debt already. That's a Las Vegas developer. The Mission Viejo Corporation, which was Highlands Ranch original developer, is a California entity. Although Highlands Ranch was done pretty well. It wasn't very abusive. So I think that was before they got so creative with the abuses. I do know that there's a client of mine that's actually in the Granby area and the developer is from St. Louis, a big St. Louis developer. So yeah, there's a fair number of out-of-state and out-of-the-country developers because Colorado is just so favorable for development. The tax laws and the regulation is very pro-developer here.
All right, that seems to be all the questions we have this evening, unless someone wants to ask something else. Thank you all for coming tonight, and we appreciate it very much. And have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Christina, if you're the host, if you could stay on for a minute, because
I will.
otherwise when you leave, you'll dump us.
In closing, before we go, John or Brian, is there a way we as individuals can get a hold of you if we have some questions we would like answered?
Sure. Like my email is JKHJ.
I'll put it in the chat. How's that?
Beautiful.
Okay, I'll
Thank
put
you.
John's. Brian, can I put yours in there too?
I just put mine. It's real easy. It's Brian. My first name.
Okay, I'll put John's in the chat.
Yeah, I put
I
it-
appreciate it. Thank you so very much.
And if anyone wants to talk to me afterwards, I'm available too.
Jeff, I don't know if you want to stay on for the task force bill discussion also.
Yeah, yes, I do. Thank you.
Yeah,
Sarah, do you want to stay on?
Yeah, I'll stay on too.
okay, thank you, yeah. Brian and John, I don't know if you know Jeff, but he was in DOLA for 25 years.
Very good.
Oh, that's what's wrong.
Brian, Jeff is the author of the privatization of government piece.
Oh, I love that. I love that. That's the 2016 piece. Oh,
Yes.
need to spread the word that that's yours. That's a wonderful piece. It needs to be in every legislator's hands.
I tried to get it there, but they didn't pay much attention.
I spread the opportunity every time I get it. It's a wonderful piece. It's fair. It's balanced and it's accurate. Oh, I'm so glad I met you.
Well, it tries to come up with a solution to the problem and get them out of the metro district's business, but they don't want to hear that either. So
Jeff, that sounds like that would be a good thing to share with this elections task force.
sure, I would. I sent you a copy of the executive summary, I think, didn't I, Maud? Or
You did, because I got a copy of it.
there's a link on that to the one that's online at CSU.
It's on the internet. The publication of
Oh,
the business.
oh,
Yeah.
that's yours. Okay, I'm using that in a presentation soon.
He's being shy. He didn't put his name on that.
It's a little dated. They've gotten creative in the last 7 years or whatever it is.
Yeah, these new authorities, if you've seen them, they're really scary.
Mhm. Yeah.
Phew.
That's-
Okay.
Bless you.
Thank you. You out.
So, let's see, you know Christina, you know Fair, you've met Jeff. Jeff is now on the State League Legislative Action Committee, and one of his hats is government, local government, obviously. And I'm co-director for action and advocacy for the State League also. And so I spotted 1105 on the task forces and was hoping to pick brains on what it sounds like it's focusing on, not focusing on the real deep issues for task forces. And I was wondering if you folks were talking to the sponsors about possible amendments.
I haven't yet, but I agree. The focus of it is very, at least in the 2 bullet points under what metro districts are supposed to do, is very limited, like regarding foreclosures and things like that. That really aren't a big deal, because for the most part, most metro districts, they do this through taxes, and the counties just, sell the tax liens, and so that's how it gets financed. But I haven't, but it's a Corinthian to tone, right? So I could reach out to them and see what I could do. It needs to be broadened. I think there's some more issues that could be put in there.
What,
Yeah, our group, I'm sorry, our group
No, go.
meets, our group meets Thursday, and we hope to put it on the agenda. Brian and Fair are part of that, of course, and see if we have as a group a position. And I'm anticipating that we'll reach out to them after the meeting on Thursday. But yeah, I have a lot of reservations about it too. I'm on the one hand very excited that they're doing this, because as I mentioned in my remarks, at the very least it shows an interest. But now the objective is, how can we make this a meaningful exercise?
That
And
prize
I
Brittany
just
was so
posted-
limited.
I posted something in the chat. We got contacted by this guy named Stan, who's with an HOA, a Colorado HOA forum. And he does not like this bill at all, because he says it's just kicking the can down the road, and claims that there's already been 2 state studies, 2 state reviews on HOA abusive practices, and that they've identified the issues, and that legislators have ignored all of them. So I guess we need to consider that. I don't want to see us held up on trying to get more, because I would really like to see a disclosure bill this year. And I don't know if that would prevent that or what.
You're talking about 1105? The two
Yeah.
tasks, the two
Yeah.
study groups or task
task
force?
forces, yeah.
I mean, one of the problems is that the report's not to be delivered until March of 2024, which is too late for legislation for next year. So really, the earliest legislation could come about from it is 2025, which is.
So would one amendment be to have the start date be the same as for the HOA task, the start and end date be the same as for the HOA task force?
Or accelerate the timetables altogether. I mean, I personally think they could do what they need to do in time to propose new legislation for next year. It's obviously too late this year, but I'd hate to give up 2 years of opportunity if that's what they're suggesting. I can hear the argument from the industry being, hey, let's hold off on any reform bills for the next 2 years until after this task force does their thing and see what they come up with. And that would not be acceptable to us, I don't think. And on the other hand, if they were willing to legislate a prohibition on any new metro districts pending the result of this task study, that we might be willing to consider that.
That's not going to happen.
No, it's not. But that's the point. If this is just a way to delay and diffuse genuine reform, then thank you, but no thank you.
But I agree, at least by December, there's no reason, I don't see why they have to, put the metro district after the HOA. They can be done in parallel, and they can both be submitted in December in time for legislation, maybe even earlier, because the problem is legislators have to get their bill titles in before then anyway.
Well, and is this a proposal to have this done during those working groups that they do when they're not in session? I know they have working groups over
Like
the
an
summer.
interim
Is
committee,
that
you
what
mean?
this is about?
It's not an interim committee, but it does have, I think they both
Oh.
have 2 legislators on
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
So it's not all legislators, it's a mix of people.
And I definitely think voting rights needs to be put in there somewhere, as opposed to just simply financial rights or against foreclosures and things like that.
Well, the language looks as if it's broad enough that anything can be studied. It just has to include those things that are on the list.
Yeah, but they may not actually, it's good to put those things on the list.
Yeah, it's true.
Um,
That was my suggestion a week ago when we first read this thing. But I don't know.
yeah,
From a kind of a trying to balance the advocacy and get in the weeds just a little bit, I think they need to provide a seat, just as they have for the HOA task force, a seat for a citizens advocacy group on metro districts. They provide a seat for that person on the HOA task force, but they don't for the Metro District Task Force. Obviously, our organization, Coloradans for Metro District Reform, has developed a lot of expertise, knowledge, and is certainly advocating. And if they're going to have a seat for that kind of organization on the HOA task force, they certainly ought to for the Metro Task Force.
That's
And then when you talk about the attorney, they say having an attorney there with expertise in special districts. Well, 99%
Me,
of the attorneys doing special district law are all developer attorneys. I mean, we need to balance that if they're going to have an attorney at all. And I'm not sure they need an attorney, but if they're going to have an attorney, they need to have an attorney who is qualified, or at least has a track record of representing resident interests. And there aren't many, but there are a couple, few, and they need to be on there, because obviously, people are going to start looking to the attorney to say, well, here's what the law says, and here's how that works legally. Well, we've been listening to that for a long time from attorneys representing development, and we know that there's another side to the story, and that needs to be balanced in this kind of exercise.
or have, say that legislative council staff should support the task force. And that be their legal,
Well, no, well, that's the drafting office, as the lawyers, but the council won't have time to do that until after May when they adjourn.
right,
So
But
if you
it
want to have
doesn't-
a report by December 31st, that ought to get started earlier than that, probably.
well, let's see, when do they start? The HOA task force must be designated or appointed on or before July 3rd, before July 1st.
Oh, so they only have 6 months too. huh?
They only have 6 months, yeah. So,
That makes it short and sweet.
it does. So you three are part of a group that's meeting Thursday. And we've just talked about possible amendments. Christina, are you going to testify if they ever come up for hearing? And I've not been following those other two bills.
I need to look some more at those other two bills, and I think I'm willing to testify. I haven't actually been to my board yet to get approval.
Are you
I
talking
know.
about the ethics and the, what's the other one? Ethics and.
Well, the
My-
60,000.
They can't
Developers
hold
cannot
veterans.
invest in their own money
Yeah.
they want to spend.
Well, and also, the thing we didn't talk about, there's a sales tax bill out there.
Well, that's right.
And that one I'm re-researching what I put down on notes I sent Maud initially to make sure I was correct on everything. And there were a couple of mistakes I'd made, but essentially what it does is it says the board can create a sales tax.
Mhm.
And I choked and gagged on it.
You mean a special district board?
Uh-huh.
A metro.
Oh my God.
A metro district.
Yeah.
And of course, my first thought is if Highlands Ranch wants a sales tax, then they ought to go incorporate.
Yeah.
first place.
really.
And as a resident of Highlands Ranch, I feel that way. But the other thing is I think of the abuse of the board of creating its own sales tax when they've already taken themselves outside of Tabor, and I'm going, oh no, this is a terrible idea.
Well, they already have sales tax authority for certain services, but this one covers
This,
park and rec.
yeah, this, yeah.
Park and
it
Recs
just-
and some other things that don't make any sense. And Jeff, the place your analysis was wrong is because of the Wayfair court case, everybody has to charge sales tax. And these districts are so, I mean, while the Department of Revenue is required to use a good GeoBase
Right.
mapping system, I'm a former auditor for the DOR. That's what I did is for a living. And, these things are so convoluted, this way, Amazon's going to be fine. But the ones that get hurt are the little people.
Mhm.
And, they don't afford that, even get a great use of the databases. So, but they're still responsible for charging these taxes. And if all these little metro districts and the Department of Revenue right now, collects sales tax for about 292 districts. If we figure that half of the fair, it only applied to the ones that were outside of the city limits. But if you figure half, I just did an estimate, half of the metro districts are outside the city limits and in the county.
Mhm.
Think of that, 1,200 more potential audit
Oh, wow.
people for the Department of Revenue to manage. And they don't do the 292 well.
Yeah, because they don't have enough staff as
They
it
don't have-
is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
by the way, just if you were asking about the testimony for those other two bills is on the same day.
Which
It's going
is,
to be February 7th,
ouch.
1:30.
I am in massive problem doing that on February 7th.
Yeah, I'm going. I think Brian and John are too.
I plan to testify on the 7th.
Okay.
I told my associate that she'll have to cover deposition for me, but that's okay. I'll be there on the 7th to testify.
Unfortunately, I have a couple things I cannot get rid of on the 7th. And I'll see what I can find somebody to do. Maybe get
Would
Deb
that be a
Guard to go
job
down there.
for Deb Guard?
That's what I was thinking, get Deb
Okay.
Guard to go down and do it.
Okay.
But you're welcome to sit in on our meeting if you're interested. It might end up boring you a little bit, but.
Might be interesting too. Why don't you send me the link there?
Okay.
Yeah. So let me drop my email. I'd be interested, it's in the chat, it's just action and then the league, lwcolorado.org.
Okay.
I'd be interested in what you folks think of it on amendments for 1105. And Jeff, you and I should probably talk about whether you have any bandwidth and want to cover
Well,
any of these
I can work
Metro.
on this.
on Metro District bills. So,
Now, Jeff, you would be a valuable voice after you guys did that study.
Yeah, we'd love to coordinate with y'all on that. So, we'd be happy just to let you know what positions we come up with. We're also talking about what positions we'll take with on the 7th.
On the two bills.
Yeah, on the two bills. And, just to give you a heads up, our organization isn't real rigid. So if we come up with a group consensus, we'll certainly promote that. And then if individuals have different nuances on things or points they want to raise, that happens too. So we're happy
Okay.
to share all of that with you.
Okay, the state legislative action committee is very much the issue group comes to consensus and then takes it to the committee of a whole for the whole legislative action committee. So it's a multi-step process at this point to,
And hence the very high integrity with the results.
well, thank you. We work on keeping that. Jeff just dropped his email in the chat also.
Okay.
He's,
For that, you mean, so you want the link for the meeting Thursday night? Okay, I'm looking it up right now. We use the same one every week, so.
so. Yeah, I'm delighted that Jeff has joined the league and joined the Legislative Action Committee because having his expertise is really valuable. He's like you guys, he knows where a lot of the bodies are buried.
20 years ago, I knew what was going on with special districts. I had to learn again at 2016 to write that paper, and I feel like I'm out of touch, so. Christina's way, better, especially from the state point of view, from the Department of Revenue point of view. Christina's got a handle on that.
I've been out of it for the game for quite a while on that end, so I had to go look some stuff up, but
Yeah. So, anyways, thank you much. Jeff, I am going to surface for our revenue group meeting tomorrow at 3:15. I may end up, watch your email, I may end up pushing it to 3:30, but during the day, I'm going to be caring for a 3-year-old, so.
Oh, still, okay.
No, it's again.
Oh, it's again, okay.
Yeah.
But they're feeling better, I hope.
Oh, he was fine by Friday afternoon and then, yeah.
I know that story well, Rod.
Yeah, you
2
have,
weeks on, a week off, 2 weeks on, a week off.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah, the joy of being the grandmother. So thank you all very much.
Okay, John
you.
and Brian.
Thank you so
If
much.
one of you has that handy, I'm having trouble finding the link. If you have it handy, send it to me and I'll send it to everybody.
Okay, super, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye now.
Good night.
Bye.